So I've got an example of one here. So these are the list of students who have contributed to the bioreactor project. And what I liked about this abstract is, or should I call it an extended abstract, is that it has a really nice rationale. So they're telling a story. They're explaining to the reader what back pain is, what's the problem with disc degeneration, and what sort of treatments are available clinically. And then explain what sort of methods or approaches have been used within the clinical environment and also within the tissue environment to try and counteract or treat some of the problems with low back pain. And so we've got a list of references here which explains some of the research groups that have developed or utilised studies to try and examine the processes involved in disc degeneration and what sort of tissue engineering approaches that they have used. Now, when they go through their literature review, they're being quite critical within this section, and by critical what I mean is that they're looking at the academic literature and they're saying, okay, these guys did all of this, they got this information, but then another research group found all of this, completely opposite results. And because the data is contradictory, the group then suggests, well, perhaps future studies should explain X, Y, Z. So what they've done in this story is that they've looked at the academic literature, they've identified some key issues, some problems, and then within this paragraph they are proposing some answers to those solutions. And that leads very nicely onto the aims and objectives of the project. So the aims, a very clear, bold statement which explains what the project is about, what it's going to do, and then a series of objectives which explains how they're going to achieve those aims. Now at the end of the extended abstract, they need to explain, not in too much detail, but enough detail, the sorts of methods that they may utilise in order to carry out the objectives within for their project. And sadly, this group couldn't pin down the sorts of methods, and that's probably because when we look at the objectives, they found it quite difficult to pin down exactly what objectives the group was going to do. And as a consequence of that, predicting the research, predicting the answers to the research questions was quite difficult for this group. Now, in contrast, this group produced an excellent extended abstract, and they had a very clear story where they're presenting the clinical problem, they're providing evidence to show how other research groups have developed incrustation techniques or incrustation models to look at the effects of how these stents change and degrade within a model. And they are very critical within the academic literature because they're presenting, okay, these are the groups that did this and these groups did that, and well, hang on a minute, these findings are contradictory and obviously there's a gap, so we need to investigate this. So they talk about lithotripsy as a novel technique which could be used to treat kidney stones, and they then explain how this technique could be developed further within their own project. And so they then explain very nicely the aims and objectives of their project. So they explain their collaboration, give details of their collaboration and who they're actually working with. And in contrast to the previous extended abstract, this group provides a lot of detail about how they're going to achieve those objectives. So they actually, in a way, explain quite very nicely the methods that they will be carrying out during their experiment. So as an example, they're saying that they will look at the effect of temperature changes and vibrations of the stent during lithotripsy application, and they'll measure the surface properties of the incrustated stents. Now that's a lot of detail, which is what you actually want to incorporate within the extended abstract. And then to end it all, they have a list of references which supports the academic literature that they've incorporated into their extended abstract. Now for the last example, this was I thought a very interesting example of an extended abstract, and I thought it was extremely written, but there were some oddities within some of the sections, and if we look at some of the text, for example, in this first paragraph, it looked as though there were two maybe three sentences that had been clumped together, and it just didn't make any sense. So as an example, ideally the new formed bone would, with time, penetrate and replace much of the graft through a process known as remodelling, a phenomenon in which old bone is sequentially removed by phagocytic cells. That looks as though there's two or three sentences that have been clumped together. Another example is in the third paragraph, where they say that over the past 30 years the interest in the use of synthetic biomaterials or scaffolds for bone implants has been ever so growing. Now I found that really strange, and the reason why I found it so odd was because it looked as though sentences had been clumped together, and also some of the text seemed to have been lifted from somewhere else. So an example, autografting is considered as the gold standard. I mean, that's information that you would find on a website. So this EA was actually checked for plagiarism, because I was aware that there was information there which I wasn't quite sure about, and sadly some of the information highlighted in blue was taken from websites. And it's important to recognise that as a reader, as an academic who's actually reading this, it's very easy for us to actually notice when information is lifted from somewhere else, because it just doesn't fit within the overall text. However, when we go further into the extended abstract, the students write a really nice detailed literature review of the research topics, and they explain the gap in the market very well, and they support the various sentences with lots of publications. And this leads very nicely onto the project aims and objectives. And what I really liked about the objectives was that they were very detailed in what they were going to do. So they give explicit information on how they're going to achieve each objective. So for example, a series of mechanical tests involving compression, bending and flexural tests will be performed for specimens, for the hydroxyapatite specimens. And that's a lot of good information which we actually require within the extended abstract. And then they have a list of references to support the work, and they even identify some limitations at the end of the extended abstract, which is quite difficult to know when you've just started a project. I mean, what sort of problems are you going to encounter, especially when you haven't actually done any of the methods, you've not had any of that experience within the laboratory environment. It may be quite tricky to know what could possibly go wrong, but they've managed to do that.
Mm-hmm.